I'm very proud, privileged, and honored to be part of a TLM production. That's all I gotta say, and I love you very, very much. I love you. Let's not forget who I am. I'm John Frusciante of the Red Hot Chili Peppers!
John Frusciante was born in Queens, New York in 1970. His passion for music came to him around the age of 9 after he showed a lot of love for punk rock music. At this time, his favourite band was the Germs, featuring Pat Smear, the guitarist who played with Nirvana. And even though he stated many times he did not know what he was doing, he still managed to play most of the Germs songs from an album called GI.
By 11, he was studying many other legendary guitarists, such as Frank Zappa, Gilmour and Hendrix.
John first heard of the Chili Peppers in 1984 when he was 13. John's guitar instructor told him he was auditioning as a guitarist for them.
Frusciante attended a Red Hot Chili Peppers performance 2 years later and rapidly became a devoted fan. He also got to know the guitarist Hillel Slovak after the show.
In 1987, John dropped out of high school to move down to Los Angeles to pursue his dream of a music career.
In early 1988, Frusciante became friends with a drummer called Diego Peligro. Peligro invited a friend to his and Frusciante's next jam, Flea the bass player. Flea and Frusciante developed a strong musical chemistry in a very short amount of time.
In June of 1988, founding guitarist of the Chili Peppers, Hillel Slovak, had died of a heroin overdose. And with the drummer, Jack Irons, in a devastated state, he decided to leave the Chili Peppers, leaving Anthony Kiedis and Flea. Flea decided to recruit Peligro on drums and Dwayne Blackbird McKnight on guitar, but Blackbird failed to musically connect with them. So, in September 1988, Flea and Anthony auditioned John. Needless to say, they were both very impressed with his performance.
When Flea rang up John with the good news, he ran through his house in excitement and climbed onto a wall, leaving permanent boot marks. Frusciante's earliest recorded performance with the band was October the 8th, 1988, where they're all dressed as superheroes.
This is John, he's only 18 years old. You ready, Dirty? Yo, Dirty! Are you ready to fall? Mind the tempo! 1, 2, 3, 4!
A few months into rehearsing, Peligro was fired from the band due to obstructing drug issues, so in the December of 1988, legendary drummer Chad Smith was hired.
At this time, an album was created by the new lineup called Mother's Milk.
Whilst recording the album, Frusciante tried to imitate a similar sound to Slovak's distinctive funky sound, but the album's producer, Michael Beinhorn, constantly disagreed with this and wanted John to play a more heavy metal tone. Mother's Milk was released on August 16, 1989, hitting number 52 on the Billboard 200. The singles released were Knock Me Down, originally a Stevie Wonder song, Higher Ground. Lastly, Taste the Pain.
The song, Pretty Little Ditty, may sound familiar to some of you. In 1999, it was sampled for the song Butterfly by Crazy Town.
Come my lady, come my lady, you're my butterfly, sugar, baby. Come my lady, come my...
After Mother's Milk being the band's most successful album, they were keen to do another one, but wanted to be careful on the producer due to the heavy restrictions Michael Feinberg put on John's guitar playing and Anthony's vocals.
The band had managed to change their record label from EMI to Warner Bros. Now their task was to find a better, more consistent producer that would work with them. So eventually, they settled on Rick Rubin. And to bring out a more creative side, the band and Rubin agreed to record their next album in a peculiar, strange location. Rick suggested a supposedly haunted mansion in the Laurel Canyon area of LA, which formerly belonged to the magician Harry Houdini.
For more than 30 days, John, Flea and Anthony stayed in the mansion grounds for a recording. Chad had never stayed as he believed it was haunted. When they weren't recording, John spent most of his free time in his bedroom painting, listening to music. He also spent time reading and recording songs he wrote for a side project with Flea and Jane's Addiction drummer, Stephen Perkins. But it all remained unreleased.
Blood Sugar Sex Magik was the band's true breakthrough album. It sold over 13 million copies on release and reached number 3 on the Billboard charts. John's guitar playing was phenomenal, especially on the track I Could Have Lied. And then with the biggest song on their album being Under the Bridge. As great and progressive as this sounded though, John could not stand the fame. It was around this time John met a woman called Tony Oswald and they started dating each other. By the beginning of 1992, with all the fame, Frusciante was starting to show signs of discomfort in the band. He became extremely introverted. The following statement is a quote from Anthony Kiedis' autobiography, Scar Tissue. Things deteriorated to the point where John and I didn't talk on the tour bus, and if we ran into each other in passing, we wouldn't even acknowledge each other. However, the biggest of issues were yet to come. Saturday Night Live, February 22nd, 1992.
He was also annoyed at Madonna for ignoring him on set, whilst also isolating himself from the others that evening.
The first song they performed, Stone Cold Bush, went relatively well, but Anthony was that angry at John he kicked him in the side of the leg for playing different chords to sabotage Kiedis' performance.
The next song, Under the Bridge, was also a mess for the band. John played it completely differently, leaving Kiedis in the dark and more key to sing in. Frusciante had his mic cut during the vocal solo, and Anthony had a look of anger and disappointment on his face.
The following is a quote from Anthony Kiedis' autobiography, Scar Tissue. I had no idea what song he was playing or what key he was in. He looked like he was in a different world. We were on live TV in front of millions of people, and it was torture. I started to sing in what I thought was the key, even if it wasn't the key he was playing in. I felt like I was getting stabbed in the back and hung out to dry in front of all of America, while this guy was off in the corner in the shadow, playing some dissonant out-of-tune experiment. I thought he was doing it on purpose just to fuck with me.
3 months later, in 1992, the band went on a world tour. However, John started hearing negative thoughts in his head, such as, "You won't make it."
John told Flea, Anthony and Chad he was leaving and was getting on the next flight back to LA with Tony Oswald. Eventually, he was persuaded to perform, but he stuck to his word and returned to LA the next day.
John went to audition for the band The Meat Puppets. He tried jamming with them, but the bassist, Chris Kirkwood, said in an interview He showed up barefoot, an out-of-tune guitar, and nothing really happened, he said. Maybe he wasn't in the right place and we were a little tight unit, but just didn't quite happen. But it could have worked.
Meanwhile, Eric Marshall filled in for John for the remainder of the world tour, and in September 1992, 4 months after John's departure from the band, former Jane's Addiction guitarist Dave Navarro was the band's new replacement.
Frusciante entered a deep depression, feeling that his life was over and he could no longer write music or play the guitar. This only made his drug problems spiral out of control. During this time, he tried distracting himself with painting and trying to finish off songs which he started on whilst living in the Houdini mansion during the recording of Blood Sugar Sex Magic.
You can see his poor living conditions from the short film Stuff, which was directed by Johnny Depp and Gibby Haynes. It's just a camera going around his house. It was such a mess.
On the 31st of October 1993, John had a gig at a club called the Viper Room in LA with his friend Flea, Johnny Depp, Al Jorgensen and Gibby Haynes. John only managed to get through one song before throwing up over Gibby and then giving up. At this time, John was becoming worse with his drug problems. Nobody really has a clear answer on what happened to River Phoenix. But some people say he was supposed to play live with Flea, Depp and Frusciante, but they made a last-minute replacement. So he decided to take a load of drugs during the performance and as a result overdosed.
Other articles say Frusciante offered Phoenix an alcoholic drink after consuming 8 times the same dose of heroin and cocaine, which eventually killed him. It's a difficult subject to talk about as there's no definitive answer, but in the end, River's family decided not to pursue John legally as they were both addicts, and technically his death was his own fault.
But then various Reddit posts say his autopsy showed he was an extremely healthy 23-year-old, and the media lied about his drug habits. But after the death of Phoenix, John's life only got worse. Around November time of 1993, an electrical fire started in John's house, 8505 Hollywood Boulevard. It started in an upstairs room, where he'd do all of his paintings. The oil paints and spray cans blew up, causing a sliding glass door to blow out, which abruptly awoke him. So he ran straight outside and told the neighbours to call the fire department.
A lot of John's stuff got destroyed in the fire, including books, paintings and notebooks, etc. Miraculously though, his 4 cassette tapes with his unreleased music had survived the fire. It was as though the fire had passed straight over them.
The next morning, John and his girlfriend moved to a rented apartment in New York and stayed there until the house had been repaired, which was around 1 to 2 months.
Once repairs to his house had been finished, John returned just to find that many of his guitar collection had in fact been stolen, and to this day, not many have been recovered. In the early 2000s, however, John did in fact receive one of his special guitars that was used to write Under the Bridge.
In April of 1994, he lived in Venice Beach for a while. During this time, a documentary was filmed about him. He looks gaunt, pale and soulless. His guitar playing was a mess. He seemed to lack in self-care, and he spoke about the beauty of the drugs he was taking.
I don't think of it as any sort of heavy alteration that hurts you. It's like, oh, if I snort a line of coke, like, oh God, that was terrible. I wish I hadn't done that in front of you. Oh, awful. Are you okay? I think I'm gonna be okay.
Okay, but now you just said you're shooting up, you're using heroin. I mean, what about that? That's something pretty heavy, isn't it?
People say so. I don't know what that means, really. Like, I don't think of it as being any sort of naughty thing or anything.
What does it mean to you?
It's just a way of making sure you stay in touch with beauty instead of letting the ugliness of the world corrupt your soul.
Later that year, in November, his debut studio album was released. It was titled Neandra Lades and Usually Just a T-Shirt. The album had 25 songs on, 13 of which were untitled, and some songs had obscure names such as Your Pussy's Glued to a Building on Fire. Soon after the release, he breaks up with his girlfriend Tony.
In late 1995, he performed live at the Hollywood Mogul, where Flea and Dave Navarro were both attending. But it wasn't a great night. His performance was a bit of a disaster.
A month later, John checked into rehab after his friends urged him to. He was visited by Anthony Kiedis. They were finally talking and on more mutual terms. John also rung up Dave Navarro to see if he could drop off a guitar for him, as there wasn't much to do at the facility. Dave arrived and gave John a black Les Paul. However, at the time, John didn't want to quit drugs. He only entered the rehab for health reasons, to let his body heal, and from the way his friends begged him. But when he was out, he sold the Les Paul that Navarro gave him to buy heroin with. Shortly after this, he shot the rest of his music video for the song Life is Above, which he started in 1992. His updated shots included him sitting on the floor, hunched over, injecting heroin. In 1996, John finished off recording for a new album. He was still using heroin. This caused him to get a blood infection in the February which nearly killed him. After this, he agreed to check into rehab again after the near-death experience. But when he came out, he tried fighting his heroin addiction by using cocaine and alcohol as a substitute.
By August, his house at 8505 Hollywood Boulevard was foreclosed, so he spent his time living in Tony's car. It's not clearly stated when John and Tony got back together, but the relationship did not last long. By late 1996, John ended up living in the Chateau Marmont Hotel.
He had an interview there with the Phoenix New Times, and the words they used to describe John's appearance were haunting. They said, I'm going to read this to you, his upper teeth are nearly gone now. They have been replaced by tiny slivers of off-white that peek through rotten gums. His lower teeth, thin and brown, appear ready to fall out if he so much as coughs too hard.
His lips are pale and dry, coated with spit so thick it looks like paste. His hair is shorn to the skull.
His flesh also bears bruises, scabs and scars.
His fingernails, or at least the spaces where they used to be, are blackened with blood. His feet, ankle and legs are poked with burns from unfiltered camel cigarette ashes which have fallen on it.
He wore a partially buttoned flannel shirt whilst having blood-stained khaki pants.
John was later kicked out of the hotel and likely became homeless. In 1997, he moved in with his new girlfriend, Meg Holiday. He lied about the extent of his drug use to her. Shortly after this, John got his teeth replaced, costing a rumoured $70,000.
On January the 3rd, a 17-year-old Josh Klinghoffer went to a live show of John's in LA. He would later go on to do many things together and be a huge part of the future of the Chili Peppers.
On January the 20th, he played a disastrous show at the Viper Room. Anthony, Chad and Flea were all present. From the news in the Viper Room, Red Hot Chili Peppers fans gathered to support John. He spent the next few months jamming after buying two new guitars, a Fender Jaguar and a Gibson acoustic.
In July, Frusciante appeared on a TV interview, and he clearly isn't sober. He seems to be wired on cocaine.
And I'd break the bottle of juice, and the people would all like spread out, because there was all this glass flying all over the place, and I'd just run into the bus,
So you're pretty adamant about.
Maybe some of them felt bad, but it was like if I was the kind of person who liked signing autographs.
On August 26th, his second album, Smile from the Streets You Hold, was released. However, this was only made so he could use the earnings to spend on more drugs.
On November 22nd, John and Anthony Kiedis meet up at a Jane's Addiction show. John wasn't sober, but it was good to hear that they were putting the past behind them. At this time, Anthony and Dave Navarro were not seeing eye to eye and just arguing, being sarcastic, and just getting on each other's skin. It wasn't a good vibe.
In January of 1998, John was admitted to Las Enquinas Mental Hospital. This was over his mental struggles, and although it's not been confirmed, he attempted suicide. He spent a month there, and by February he was clean from drugs and rented an apartment in Silver Lake. Between this time and the next 2 months, he spoke more with Flea, Anthony and Chad. After Dave Navarro started to have his own problems with heroin, he checked into rehab. So with his absence, the Chili Peppers offered John a place back in the band. Flea and Anthony went around his house to ask him, and John replied with a slight sob, Nothing would make me happier in the world.
July 12th, that was his first day that he played live with the old bandmates. Flea, Chad and Anthony could see his creative spark and enthusiasm and ready to take Chili's band to new heights.
After the release of their 7th studio album, Californication, on June 8, 1999, they grew in publicity. The Californication tour was the band's biggest to date and the most successful, helping breaking them through to an even wider audience and seeing their supporting album achieve their largest worldwide sales, playing at incredible but big events such as Woodstock, Reading, Brazil, Chile and more.
They sounded alive and passionate. They went from being a heavy metal, emo style band and rejuvenated back to recreating what they used to with a modern twist and a cleaner sound.
2 years later, with John's drug issues being a thing of the past, he released his 3rd solo album to record only Water for 10 days, with the style featuring electronic house beats after experimenting with synthesizers as well as Mediterranean-style acoustic guitar playing.
A year later, in 2002, the Chili Peppers released another big-selling album titled By the Way. This album has some of the best songs performed live by the band, such as Can't Stop,
Can't stop, addicted to the shindig. Chopped up, it says I'm gonna win big. Choose not to life of imitation. Distant,
By the Way,
standing in line to see the show tonight. Can never lie on heavy flow. By the way, I try to say I'd be there. Waiting for.
and Don't Forget Me.
In 2004, John was creating incredible things. He started a small project with a temporary band called Ataxia, which included guitarist Josh Klinghoffer and Joe Lally. After 2 days, they recorded about 90 minutes of material, did a couple of shows and then disbanded. All in the same year, they released 3 studio albums, Shadows Collide with People in February, The Will to Death in June, and Inside of Emptiness in October.
In November, he released my personal favourite in a collaboration album with Josh Klinghoffer, A Sphere in the Heart of Silence, featuring incredible songs such as The Afterglow.
Down is my place, man. No place out there I have to be. Lost is where I am. And I've no reason to be found. To reason from no sound to reason. From no sound to reason.
In February of 2005, John Frusciante released his biggest studio album, Curtains. This features his biggest solo song, The Past Recedes, a beautiful song with a relaxing acoustic melody.
Even though he was doing great, he still remained anti-rockstar. In an interview about Curtains, he said, "As far as my solo record, I don't want a gold record or anything. I'm happy to be small and so for people appreciate the music who really like me for being me." Frusciante doesn't make songs for the money, he makes them to be appreciated by himself and others around him. He's a true musician.
In 2006, the Chili Peppers were back with a new album, Stadium Arcadium. They started recording it in September 2004 and it released in May 2006. They used the mansion alongside producer Rick Rubin for their recording process, just like Blood Sugar Sex Magic.
This is their longest album to date, with a total runtime of 129 minutes, featuring 28 songs. The live performances were just amazing. John's guitar solos and intro jams with Flea and Chad was something so incredible it felt like something out of this world.
When the tour for the album was announced, Frusciante added a +1 to the group, Josh Klinghoffer. His job was to be a backup guitarist and vocalist, whilst also creating sounds using an FX keyboard.
Around this time, John paid a visit to an old friend. One day he knocked on Dave Navarro's door and handed him back a black Les Paul. But let's let Dave tell the story.
No, I don't think so.
I don't know. Okay, but so whatever. The long end of the story was, like, 10 years later, John calls me and it's like, hey man, can I come up to your house? And I was like, sure. Yeah, of course, come on up. I give him the address. He comes up, knocks on the door, and he's got a guitar case. And I'm like, oh, it's not unusual that a guitar player would bring a guitar to a guitar player's house. And he opens it up and it's a black Les Paul. And he goes, I just wanted to give this to you because years ago, you gave me a Les Paul and I sold it and bought drugs with it. And I just want to make it right.
Aww.
And I was like, wow, man. And we sat and we talked for like a couple hours and, you know, it was just a cool moment. So that black Les Paul is at my house and that's going to go up on the wall.
That's pretty cool. Great.
Yeah, I love that.
As the Stadium Arcadium tour came to an end, Leeds Festival was the last place to go. After this, in the summer of 2007, the band took a 2-year hiatus.
During this time, John was working on his 8th solo album, The Empty Room, and it was released in January 2009, but by July it was announced that Frusciante had left the band for the second time to focus on a solo career. The band was on the verge of breaking up, so John requested a guitarist to replace him, Josh Klinghoffer. As the band entered a new era, so did John.
In 2012, John released his first album since parting with the Chili Peppers. It was called PBX, Funicular Intaglio Zone. In 2014, he released another studio album titled Enclosure. One thing to notice is all the music he has released since his departure has been electronic style. He wanted to experiment with new sounds.
In 2015, he released a self-titled album with the alias Trickfinger. Trickfinger 2 followed 2 years later in 2017. Both albums contained unreleased electro and acid house songs which he recorded in 2007.
Meanwhile, over at the Red Hot Chili Peppers with Josh, they released 2 new records. The first one was 2011's I'm With You, featuring songs like Rain Dance Maggie, Brendan's Death Song, and Look Around. Then in 2016, they released The Getaway, featuring songs like Dark Necessities. Goodbye Angels, and much smaller but appreciated songs such as The Longest Wave.
Just another play, the pirate and a papillon. Time to call it a day. Maybe you're my last love, maybe you're my first. Just another way to play inside the universe. Now I know why we came.
On 15th of December 2019, it was announced on Instagram saying, "The Red Hot Chili Peppers announced that we are parting ways with their guitarist of the past 10 years, Josh Klinghoffer. Josh is a beautiful musician who we respect and love. We are deeply grateful for our time with him and the countless gifts he shared with us. We also announced that with great excitement and full hearts that John Frusciante is rejoining the group." I feel like John and the other members could have done this better instead of just let Josh go, as he was a shy musician who finally started to get comfortable and find his place in the band, and he just sort of got swept aside. Although he said he's accepting of the decision, he expected himself to be leaving at some point anyway. He knew it wasn't forever. The whole event was extremely heartbreaking, but at the same time makes you feel incredibly happy and excited for the future of the band.
In the beginning of 2020, John performed with the Chili's at a private charity event. Dave Navarro was also there, and through photographs, it's nice to see Dave and Anthony Kiedis have patched up their feuds.
In October, John produced an acid house album named after his cat, Maya, of 15 years, who sadly passed away.
John is a man who's been to hell, suffered through years of pain, drug addiction, teeth loss, and practically homeless at times. And for the past 23 years, he's accomplished greatness, such as being the lead guitarist of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. He repurchased his house, fixed his drug habits and his teeth, became a godfather to Flea's daughter, and he's just living the Hollywood lifestyle. He's a legendary guitarist who I look up to as much as he does to Jimi Hendrix, and he will leave a massive musical footprint for future generations to see. John Frusciante is and always will be one of the greatest guitarists of all time.
John is a very talented individual with a lot of instrumental and creative skill.
He's on another level to the majority of guitarists nowadays. His work is brilliant.
We can't wait to see what you have for us in the years to come.
I hope he has a great future filled with more groundbreaking guitar playing.
We love what you're doing, John. Keep on creating beauty.